Hi guys, my name is Ronisha Horn. Welcome to my YouTube channel. You're tuned in to my new series called When God Writes Your Love Story, a series that tells various stories of how God brought Christian couples together. Ever since I was a little girl, I dreamed of telling love stories to the world. Who better to be the author than God himself? Now, without further ado, I present to you the bride and groom.
And we are back on When God Writes Your Love Story. How did God tell you that she was the one? We are here with Mr. and Mrs. Antoine Steele, Ariane, and Twan. Thank you guys so much for coming on the show today. We want to hear your love story. How did you know? So I love you guys. You're friends of mine. I appreciate you so much for being here, taking time out of your day. We're in quarantine, but you know, it's cool. It's all good. We all family.
Right.
So I just want to start before we get into how God told you she was the one, how God told you he was the one, what you guys' life was like in that single season. You know, how did you become whole on your own before coming together? And then we'll get into the juicy stuff.
Okay. Ladies first.
Okay. So a lot of people don't know, but we had met years before, and we were I'll just fast forward to a few years before our engagement. I was actually living in Columbus, and I had recently gotten out of a 4-year relationship, and obviously I was still just doing my thing, living in the world, doing whatever I wanted to do. I was very broken during that time. So after that relationship ended, my friends, they always think they're doing you a favor, but they were immediately introducing me to other guys. Like, you just need to get over it. And so they'd introduce me to someone else that I was it wasn't an official relationship, but to just be honest and completely transparent, we were behaving as if we were in a relationship, but because I had just gotten out of this other very worldly relationship, I was very hesitant to commit even in that way, as making someone my official boyfriend. And so I was just broken but unwilling to admit that. I knew that I was hurt, but outside of the relationship, not understanding or not realizing at that point how far I'd wandered away. And I think at that point, I always tell Twan, my God moment that redirected my path was I was in the bed with this guy that I had been talking to, and he said, "I love you." And I couldn't say it back. And the next morning, I was just sitting there, and I was like, Twan and I know we hesitate on saying God told me. In that moment, it was literally as if God was telling me, he has to go. And I jumped up, and I said, "You gotta go." And he was so confused. He didn't understand what was happening. At that moment, I didn't understand what was happening. Just to give you a little bit of a backstory, I had grown up in church. I had gone my entire teenage years with a promise ring. But I had wandered during college. I had lost my virginity during college. I had started doing so many things that
we all do.
Yes. But in that moment, when I couldn't say I love you back, it was if I heard God say, "You know better." And I told him he had to go. And a few years earlier, Twan had given me these books. Like I said, we were friends. We had seen each other off and on. We had even talked off and on prior, like in my early college years. But that guy, he left. He was so confused. I was confused. I didn't understand what was happening. But I went in my closet, and I remember he had given me some tapes during one of my visits home. And he had, at that time that he'd given me the tapes, he had already changed his life.
This is back in the day. Tapes.
Right. They were DVDs. Yeah. And there was the Love, Sex, and Relationship series. I do. There were Love, Sex, and Relationship series from Pastor Vernon, and I was going on a weekend trip, and I felt the tug, but I was just like, where did I go wrong? And I was going on a weekend trip home because I lived in Columbus, and I popped them in. When he had given them to me a couple years before, I had just thrown them like, I'm not trying to hear that right now. I'm doing my thing. So I took them out of the closet and I went and listened to them. And so at that point, I thought it was God telling me, you need to go back to being abstinent. You are not to be giving your body away in that way. But later on that weekend, I ended up back in Columbus for a service. And the service, the pastor was talking about allowing God in one room in your house. So if he walked into this home right now, would you say, all right, sit on the couch, Jesus, don't move? And if he said, okay, but I need to go to the bathroom, my bathroom is off limits, or don't go in my refrigerator, would you have the audacity to say something like that to God? And by compartmentalizing him to just my sex life, that is what I was doing when he was tugging me to bring my whole self to him, bring all areas, my whole house to him. And that was, so I say that bed instance was the beginning, but ultimately that service where it was just like, you still don't get it. He's not telling you to stop sleeping with people that you are not married to. He's telling you that he wants your heart back, your whole life.
Surrender.
And so that was my single season, and from then on I lived alone in Columbus. I had friends in Columbus, but most of us had finished college, so we're moving away. And then I bumped into this guy during another random visit home at the Woman How Much Are You Worth conference.
Yeah, it was at the Woolston Center.
Yep. We ran thousands of people, and I didn't go there looking for him.
It was crazy how we just bumped into each other too.
Wow.
And so that was my single season. Obviously, our single season carried into our engagement and all of that. But the beginning of my single season was a lot of isolation with a few close friends. I had one friend who had also just rededicated her life, and we kind of walked the thing out together because it can be very lonely.
Yeah.
Because everyone doesn't understand why you all of a sudden don't want to go out anymore, and why you all of a sudden are cutting all men off, and why you all of a sudden don't want to watch certain TV shows, because right now I just can't handle even seeing that. And so it was very isolated, but necessary isolation to allow myself to really go through that healing process.
Awesome.
Yeah, that was like a prophetic isolation, we in isolation. Well, I'm being deep. Yeah.
So tell me about your single season.
So I guess we'll just start at when we recommitted our lives to Christ. So, well, a little bit before that, I was in a relationship at the time, and just a young man in his 20s, not really understanding the value of a relationship and like what it really means to be a man. So I just approached things a little bit differently. Not so much like infidelity, but I just was immature. And at that time, I felt like there was like kind of like this tug at my heart as well. I didn't grow up in church, but I had a grandmother that would, whenever I stayed with her, she would make sure we went to church. I would wake up in the morning to her praying. To this day, that's what she always does. So I always knew about Jesus, and I would say, oh yeah, I'm a Christian, I'm a believer, but my life didn't reflect that. And I got to a point where I would do stuff like I would go to Bible study, and then after Bible study, I would go to Drake. That was like a bar back then. Or on Sunday, I would go to church, and then I'll be in the View later on that night. And in my mind, I'm thinking like, well, I'm going to church. I'm cool then. Like, that's balance, right? I can go to the club and I can kick it with my friends. It's not like I'm out here killing people, and I would make these terrible sins like as if like these sins are, if I'm not doing these things, then I'm cool. And then it got to a point where I just felt like the tug, was just so like, it was so obvious, and I'll never forget this. And I remember I used to journal before I surrendered my life to Christ. I used to journal from January 2010 till January of 2011. I journaled every single day. And I remember looking at this journal on, it was like a few days before I committed my life to Christ. And it was a guy, I was in a bar, and he said to me, Twan, man, he said, I can see that you're different, that you changed. And I'm thinking like, oh, okay, yeah, because maybe I'm just like a little mature now. I'm growing up. I'm not out as much. I'm not wild and doing stuff that I used to normally do. So I felt proud in that. And I didn't know that, a few days later, something drastic was about to happen. And I remember it was April 10th, 2011, around 11 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. I remember it like that. And I call him my cousin, but it's more like a very, very close friend. He had called me. I was living with my parents at the time. He had called me, and I don't know if I couldn't, like, I didn't get service on my phone or something, so I called him on the house phone. You know how they got the like phones on the walls, like, so it was like on the kitchen, like in the kitchen on the wall.
Yeah.
So I'm on the phone with him, and he's just like, his voice is just real different. He just sound like super proper, and I'm like, man, why you sound like that? He's like, man, Twan, man, I surrendered my life to Christ. I'm like, man, what are you talking about? Like, man, shut up. He's like, no, I'm serious, man. I surrendered my life to Christ. And we had this long conversation. And while I was talking to him, I'm just thinking, like, man, like, this is the guy that I was taking to church. Like, I was literally picking him up and taking him to church. I remember, and I to this day, this is honest to God true. The first time I picked him up to take him to church, when he got in the car, his eyes was like real slanted. And I looked at him like, dude, like, are you high? And he was like, yeah, it made me think better when I'm listening to the pastor. And I'm like, dude, don't ever come to church with me like that again. I was mad at him, like I was mad, like as if I didn't probably smoke, a couple of days before that, or the day before that, something like that. Yeah. But on Sunday it's God's day, so I don't do that. And I remember when we walked into the church, the lady, you have greeters, whatever, she was getting ready to hug him. He put his hands up like he was about to get patted down. I promise you, like, he put his hands up like this, and I'm looking like. So this, in my mind, this is the guy that's talking about he surrendered his life to Christ, and I'm thinking like like how you like I'm supposed to be the guy. I'm taking you to church. And long story short, when I got off the phone with him, I just felt like in that moment it was like God was giving me this divine ultimatum. Like it was just like what you gonna do? Like, are you gonna continue to run from me? I'm calling you. And I was listening to this guy. This is kind of a side note. This is in modern, well, not modern, but actual, like a few weeks ago, and I was listening to him. He said there's a difference from the calling and being called. He said when somebody's calling you, if you're not answering, it's still a calling. When you answer the phone, then you can say that you have been called.
Wow.
So for me, it was just like, man, God had been calling me, but I hadn't been called. I've been denying him. I've been running away from him because deep down I know that if I surrender my life to him, I'm going to have to give up the things that I'm comfortable with.
Wow.
So I was just sitting there, and I'm standing there. I'm like, Mom, I'm changing my life. And she was like, oh, that's good, baby. That's good. I'm like, no, like, Mom, I'm serious. I'm changing my life. Not realizing, like, I'm not changing anything, but like, he's like doing this new thing in my heart. It's not this behavior modification thing. It's this heart transformation thing.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I just felt like this freshness come over me. And I'm not trying to be deep because everybody's experience is not the same.
Yeah.
But I remember getting ready to go to church, and my girlfriend at the time, picked me up, and I got in the car, and I'm like, I'm not drinking, I'm not smoking, I'm not, I'm not going to the club, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. And she was just like, okay. She was like, what about sex? And I was like, because in my mind, I'm thinking like, that's the thing that I'm going to kind of like, slowly but surely, I'm going to ease off. I'm not going to do it like cold turkey. I'm going to do, that's the one thing I'm going to just do. And when she said it in my mind, I was like, I was going so hard that I didn't want to sound like a hypocrite. So I was like, you know what, you're right. And that started my journey of being abstinent until, me and my wife got married. But so from that point on, and then what made it even more crazier is at the time, DJ, who somebody I hadn't like talked to in a while, but somebody I grew up with, who was always like my brother. We wasn't that close at the time. I had seen him at church, and then later on that night we had talked, and he was like, "Man, I committed my life to Christ too." And I'm like, "You too?" And it was like God just like gave me that brother right in the midst of like just what I knew was gonna be like a bunch of people dropping off or whatnot, and he was really what I needed in that season to like really walk out. So I think for me, that was like the beginning of like, singleness is different in the world than in the kingdom. Because when you're in the world, you're not even thinking about those things. Yeah. Like, even if you are thinking about marriage, it's just a whole different perspective than being in the kingdom. So I think once I got into the kingdom, like my mindset was like, okay, well, I know I got to get married, or I want to be married at some point. I got to walk this walk out, with true obedience and faith and love, and I think as I started getting into the church culture is when it really like was in my mind of like the importance of marriage and how it was held in such a high regard.
Yeah.
And then all of my friends started getting married around me. And then it's like now I'm like the third wheel, the fifth wheel, the seventh wheel, and then it's like the pressures of society and it led to just all these just different thoughts and these frustrations and marriage and just all the things you struggle with as a single man, you know, trying to do right. And I think it was when, and we could say this story for another time, but I think it was when I went to LA. Me and my friend, we went to LA for our birthday. We just had a good time out there. There was a young lady that I knew in college, and I had reconnected with her. And in my mind, I thought that this was gonna be like we were gonna date. And I feel like in that moment, I was like, when it didn't work out, I was like, you know what, this is like, okay, let me just like stop doing all of this, you know, trying to, you know, date and all these things, and I really focused on God. And that's when I started writing the book. And obviously there was moments where me and her had like seen each other, talked or whatever, but it was like this in and out, whatever. But then it finally got to a point where when I wrote that book, like I think I was serious about my singleness before that, but that was when I was like really focused. And I think that kind of just led to, you know, me and her, you know, eventually dating again and then getting engaged and getting married. So,
Yeah.
I mean, but there's so much to talk about with that.
Yeah, it is. One thing I want to point out is because I was friends with you guys during some of this time, and so I remember the way that you carried yourself as a single man, and you were so serious. And I had never met a guy who was that serious about his single season. Like he did not play about his single season.
Not at
like
all.
I am not dating. I'm not looking for a wife. When I look for a wife, I know what I'm looking for. And I don't know if you remember this, but we were having a conversation about relationships and who you would consider to be your wife, even though you weren't even looking for your wife. In that conversation, you said, I don't even know anybody that I would marry at this moment. If it was anybody, it would be Ariane. You guys weren't even dating.
Oh, wow.
You guys were still friends at that time, just serving with each other, but you said that to me, and I remember I smile every single time I think about you guys because you see God writing a love story with the DVDs he gave you, with you saying that to me in conversation so casually, like if it was anybody else I would marry right now, it would be Ariane.
Wow.
And he doesn't remember that.
That's crazy.
But that's a testimony to what God ended up doing. And so you get to the point where you write the book, and the book is called Single to Single.
Shameless
Shameless.
plug.
Single to Single, which I have in my library.
Hey.
He is an author, you know.
Where is it at? Where is it?
It's over there in the red section. My bookcase is color coded. My bookcase is color coded.
That's
So, so if you're single out there, you need to get that book by Antoine Steele, Single to Single. You write the book, and then you guys begin dating. So, talk about the point where you knew it was time to get married. Like, when did you know that God was saying she was a wife? When did you know God was saying he was a husband?
So, just a really funny story before we get into that portion of the book writing and all of that. At the start of the book writing, we had reconnected because I'd moved back to Cleveland to start graduate school, and obviously we reconnected. He was writing his book, and we started talking at that point, and obviously wanting, because we had known each other for years, wanting to see where this might go. Obviously it was so early in our reconnection that we weren't explicitly talking about marriage, but knowing how we both felt, us both being believers, that we weren't aimlessly dating or conversing or just hanging out with people. So even though it wasn't being explicitly said, we had started reconnecting. But during the book, he was like, as he was writing the book, he was like, but you know what? And I'm just stating it kind of like, there was a conversation. But at the end of the conversation, it was just like, I told God I was going to be single. And while I wrote this book, until it was done, I was going to be wholeheartedly full on single, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And, obviously he was still single because we weren't married, but he really wanted to embody everything that he wanted to pour into that book was about not even being connected to someone right now or pursuing the rawness of singleness, because we both experienced that. Obviously, we talk a lot about being single because you're not actually married, but there's, and he talks about this in the book, different types of singles. And so you can be single and dating, single and engaged, which obviously we went through all of those steps, but he wanted to be just in the rawness of your singleness, in that space where you are not you're not even focused on the relationship. This is all about your healing, your intimate relationship with Christ, your preparation for a relationship, because once you start that timeline of now we're dating, exclusively because that's what we did as believers, it was there's no stopping it. Do you know what I mean? And we made that mistake as far as showing this interest, let's get on this train, and then like, whoa, it's not time for that. And that's that, yeah.
You have to do part 3, 4, 5.
Yes, because we did it once, but then we did it twice with even our engagement going ahead of God. So those were the 2 times where it was just like we weren't listening for God's voice in our timeline, and how ultimately that led to us having to go back, do some healing during those processes, and reapproach one another at later times.
So and that's good. That's awesome. What was the point where you had gone through those different obstacles, and then you're like, okay, now is the time? What was that signal? Like, how did you know that you were moving in the right time when you did?
So one thing, the book was done.
Okay. Good sign.
The book was done, and it was. This is another little snippet. I helped him with the editing of his book, but even that was just kind of like we waited till it was all the way done and made sure that it was about the book.
Yeah.
And so keeping it very professional, which was hard at first because it was like we literally stopped talking, like having communication, so that this is not another fake relationship. We're not ready. Wait a minute. Are we ready? That type of thing. So
and that's the consequence. Because you can look at that and be like, this is not fair, or why should we be in this situation where we got to stop talking? It's like, but if you knew what God had you to do in a certain season, and you go ahead of Him, you can't be mad of the consequence.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't be mad because you don't know how that looked. You can't pick how it's gonna look. You can't pick that. So you can't say you can't say, look, okay, well, I know God, I'm a disobey you, and I'm gonna also pick how you're gonna discipline me. You can't pick that. No. So I feel like in that moment it was tough for me, because it's like, if I would have just stuck with what I said, I knew that I was supposed to do. I knew I was supposed to write this book. I didn't need to date, because I needed to be in this rawness of my singleness. I needed to feel all of this while I was producing this, so it will be something that's truly authentic, and I can walk through what people are dealing with, and then just say, all right, well,
compromise.
You know what? We could just do this, whatever. And then now I had to go back. Like there was hurt there that never had to happen in the first place.
Yeah.
If I would have just stuck with what I was supposed to be doing, and that's a major lesson that many singles can learn.
Yeah, absolutely.
In different contexts, of course.
Yeah, for sure.
But aside from the book being done, we started. Well, we knew that had been fulfilled, and that we were, at least that portion of the process was over. But we already known about our obvious interest in pursuing a relationship. So after that, that's when we kind of jumped ahead again and started immediately talking about marriage without any consultation with our parents, with God. Really, it was all us. It was just like we were tired of waiting. We've known each other for so many years, and another time where we got off track with listening and waiting. Even if you know who, it may not be the time.
There's a scripture. It's a song, Song of Songs. I think it's 2:7 when it says, "Do not wait in love, until the time is right."
Yep.
And that's so powerful. And people always say, "Okay, well, when is the time right?" And that's something that we talk about in the book. But if your knowledge of that person's character, and their holiness is I guess surpassing, or it's like far beyond, you know, the pace of the relationship. So basically what I'm saying is, if you don't know that person's character well, if you don't know how or observe how that person serves or their relationship with Christ, if that is here but the relationship is here, then there needs to be a step back. So until you can say there's an undying or undeniable devotion of their relationship with Christ and their character, until you can really say that you have a good grasp of that, you shouldn't be with that person. So it's like, yeah, I see this person as nice, but like, do I know how they treat their mother?
Wow.
Or I see this person as nice, but like, how do they, you know, deal with pressures? And it's not saying that you have to be perfect, but does that person have some foundation?
Yeah.
And if you don't have that knowledge of that person, but y'all are already here talking about, yeah, I love you, I want to marry you, then you're moving way too fast.
Yeah.
I mean, if we just do like basic math, it's like, that would mean that every person, well, first off, there's more women than men on this earth. So, you know, that means that right there in itself, you know, is tough. But then it's like people pass away, you know, people marry the wrong people. I just believe that there's no such thing as a soulmate. SOUL, we talk about it being like a soulmate, SOLE. Like, this is your soulmate. This is the person that you are with, you know, who God has put you. I remember John Piper said something. He said, if you want to know if this is the person that if you married the right person, just look at the look at the marriage certificate.
Right.
If you want to know, because I think we put so much emphasis on this fairy tale, you know, stuff. You know, it got to be, you know, God saying like, oh yeah, walk over to her, or it has to be. I mean, I'm not limiting God, because He can, you know, talk to people in different ways, but I just think that we should kind of like stop looking for these dramatic things. The Bible is what we need to, you know, to utilize more, to hear who, you know, what he says. And it's so simple when the Bible gives advice to us about dating or about marriage, and when it says to not be unequally yoked with an unbeliever. So if the Bible tells us to not be unequally yoked with an unbeliever, then who are we to be equally yoked with? A believer.
Yeah.
And then the entire New Testament, pretty much most of the New Testament, especially the epistles, is breaking down what a believer is. And then that's the person that you should pursue.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of times we make this, it has to be like, oh, they got to be compatible. They got to be, they got to have this, you know, background. They got to do this and they got to do that. And it's like, to be honest, it doesn't matter how much you guys feel like you align. Once you get married, two imperfect, inherently sinful people coming together are going to have to learn how to become one flesh.
Absolutely.
That man's going to have to learn how to be the Christ in that household, how to love unconditionally, how to die sacrificially. That wife is going to have to learn how to be unwaveringly submissive. She's going to have to learn how to respect and honor her husband, and to be a helpmate. And you know, we don't have to get into like roles and stuff like that, whatever. But these are just the basic things that it tells us to do in Scripture.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what we should be, you know, looking for. And for me, to answer the question, it was like she said, it was just that peace. It was like, okay, you know, you did what you're supposed to do. Now, you know, I free you. You know, you have my blessing to, you know, to marry the person you want to marry. And honestly, truth be told, I don't even remember that conversation when you said that it would be her.
Yeah.
But the first time I ever met her, the first time I laid eyes on her, which was on Facebook, I knew it was something different about her. And that was when I wasn't even like thinking about God or marriage. But I was like, man, this woman is beautiful. Oh, she's smart too. Oh, she's a good girl. Oh, she got character. Oh, she's creative. I was just like, her friend was just like telling me all these different things. Shout out to Bianca. Bianca's the plug. So I was just like, man, like, I like this woman a lot. And then when we would just talk, I would just, and even at that age, I felt like, I could marry her.
Yeah.
So for me, it was always like she was like always that person that I wanted to be with. I just didn't know how to make sense of it until, you know, I really, you know, committed my life to Christ. So that's like how I would say she was the one or how I knew she was the one, and that peace that I had. So.
Well, God is already at the end. So he already knew how the story would end. You know, what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. So why you couldn't pray him away?
No way.
And that's the amazing part of it. I think that
as individuals, when we're seeking Christ as individuals, our will aligns with his will.
Yeah.
And then it becomes the one because he already sees it. He already knows what we're going to choose.
Yeah.
But he doesn't take that
That's
choice
good.
away from us.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's very encouraging. Thank you guys so much. Last word of encouragement to and you guys have really been doing this throughout our entire time, encouraging singles and encouraging couples, I believe, as well. But anything that you may not have mentioned that you want to share with the World Wide Web on trusting God in your single season and trusting God in your dating season before you even get married, and even while you're married. Any words of advice?
I think mine would be, I talked a lot about my single without dating. We talked a lot about the different levels of being a single, and I think that there are so many singles who don't value the time that is I'm truly single without the pursuit yet. And just how valuable that time was in truly grounding yourself and making sure that you are not pursuing this intimate relationship with Christ because you are seeking some reward or because you are seeking marriage or because if I do this right, then God is going to give me the man. And I think just really taking that time for yourself in order to heal, in order to become whole, in order to have that intimate fellowship with him, because him and I talk about this so much about how as you begin to date, my time is stretched. Once we have marriage, the time is even more stretched. And so once we divide that time, adding in children and things like that, it's just
where we're not at
we
yet.
love we're not there yet. We love being married, but there's nothing like just having that divided time and devotion to yourself and really just taking advantage of that time. I think is something that I would tell someone, don't take it for granted.
And I would say to that point, and having that undivided devotion to the Lord and being able to focus on yourself, just remember that it's not about perfection. It's just preparation and bettering yourself, because the worst thing that can happen in this situation is that you'll be a better person.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing that can really happen. That's why it's so important to really focus on who you are. And, like one of the things we talk about in the book, like the 5 essentials is spiritual maturity, physical well-being, emotional stability, mental protection, and financial security. Like focusing on those things, getting your money right, killing some debt. You want to get some abs. You want to eat healthier. You want to get your mind right, your emotions right. You want to be healthy. You won't have to worry about the relationship that you had prior. You don't want to bring that into the relationship. So all these things. And you're doing this to prepare yourself for marriage, but also at the same time you're doing this to be the best, self, who you are. And then, that would be the main thing I would say in regards to that. But then also when it gets to like, if you are at a point where you want to date, it doesn't have to take 2 or 3 heartbreaks for us to get it right.
That's good.
I don't believe that. I don't believe that you have to have a heartbreak to get marriage. Like I don't believe that. Now that's many of our stories. That's many of our our situations or whatnot. But it doesn't have to take that. So don't go into it with this mindset that okay, well this may fail or I'm gonna just practice for the next person, whatever. Be your best self. Develop that undivided devotion to the Lord. That intimacy, not just reading your word, going to church or reading your word, getting up out of here or saying a quick prayer or whatever, but really taking time to just spend time with him. Quality time with him, and just watch how he just nourish that relationship and you just grow, and then it'll just lead to everything else. So yeah, I would say that would be my main thing to get a single.
This has been awesome. Thank you guys so much for being with us today.
Thank
you guys for being with us today. Don't forget to cop that book, Single to Single by Antoine Steele. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. I appreciate you guys so much. We got more coming, more inspirational stories, more stories about Christ, and more stories about God writing love stories.